While living in Australia when I was in my 20s, I worked at Macca's for a short period of time, which is what they call McDonald's. It's the same business, just a different name on the buildings. Now, after living in Australia for almost 2 years at that point, I was pretty used to seeing animals that I wasn't used to seeing while back in the States, including way too many spiders that I probably could have gone my whole life not knowing about. But over time, getting used to seeing it and certain things stop freaking you out as much as they used to. That being said, there are times when you will still get shaken up more than you would like. When I was at work one day, everything had been going pretty well. It was a typical day and we had just finished up the midday rush, so things were finally starting to slow down. This was typically when the crew who was working at the time would take the chance to get some cleaning done to make things easier for the guys closing at night. After wiping down the countertops and the workstations, I was the one who was tasked with sweeping the floors, and if necessary, mopping and cleaning any messes that had been left behind. It wasn't a big deal, and I got right to it. I was just about done, and was in the process of stuffing the broom underneath the bottom of one of the stations, when all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like air hissing out of a tire. At first, I honestly thought I hit something or knocked something over and had just misheard the noise, but there it was again. This time, it was a distant hiss, and I don't know what it was that possessed me to get down on my hands and knees to see what it was. In hindsight, I should have known, as my face almost touched the ground, and I looked underneath the workstation. I saw the wide open mouth of a massive constrictor striking out at me. The snake latched its fangs into my forearm and began to pull the rest of its body toward my arm to do what it did best, tighten and constrict. I let out a loud scream as the fangs dug into my arm, and by the time my coworkers were seeing the situation I was in and figuring out how to help me, the only thing getting me through the pain of the massive spike-like fangs digging into me was knowing that boa constrictors aren't venomous and instead kill their prey by constricting their body around them. The snake had wrapped itself entirely around my arm as a coworker and I tried to pry the mouth off of my forearm using the handle of a small hand scrubber that we used to wash the counters. I could feel it tightening as if it were trying to squeeze the life out of an animal. Only the animal was my arm. Eventually, we did manage to pry the snake off, and by the time emergency services had gotten there, my manager had actually already had the snake in a bin with a lid on it. I ran over to the hospital and made sure I wasn't at risk of infection and that the snake didn't tear anything. All I know is that I have never been so afraid of an animal in my life, and I definitely think twice about looking into tight, dark spaces if I ever find myself back in Australia. I used to never mind working the closing shift at my local McDonald's. It typically wasn't too busy during the later hours of the night, like between 10:30 and when we closed at midnight, plus whatever pre-made food was left over. The closer was allowed to take home with them. This usually meant that I was able to take home some fries, some apple pies, cookies, and every now and then some sandwiches or nuggets. It really wasn't a bad gig, at least not until the robbery. It was toward the end of August, 3 years ago, and I was getting ready to close the store. Everyone else had gone home, and the place was empty, so I figured I would start cleaning up in the back. However, after a couple of minutes of cleaning, I heard movement, and when I poked my head around the corner, I saw 2 men waiting at the counter to order. So I yelled out to them that I would be right there with them, and then proceeded to take their order. I remember they asked me if the fryer was still on because they wanted fries, but specifically a fresh batch. That was a bit of a pain, but at the end of the day, I didn't mind throwing some fries in because I would get to take some home with me. So I took the order and told them that it would be about 10 minutes while I set everything up. Things seemed normal, so I turned around and began to make my way toward the French fry station to prepare their meals. That was when I heard the sound of one of the men climbing over the counter, and before I could turn to confront them, I felt something hard smash into the back of my head. I fell to the floor, and my vision had gone blurry. As I struggled to get up, I felt one of the guys put his hands on me and flip me to my back so I was facing him. He grabbed me by the collar and began dragging me to the back of the restaurant and into the giant walk-in freezer. The last words he said to me were, "Better get cozy," as he shut the door and made sure that it latched. Now, for those who don't know, most walk-in freezers won't open from the inside, which is one thing I never understood. But these guys must have known it because they left me inside of the walk-in freezer knowing I would have no way to get out. I tried my best to stand, but my head was throbbing from whatever they had hit me with, and the more I moved, the more dizzy I became. As I was laying on the freezing cold floor, the only warmth I could feel was the blood that had been running from the top of the back of my head down my neck. I'm not sure how long I was in the freezer before I began to pass out, but I remember popping in and out of consciousness a few times and doing my best to yell out for help, but no one could hear me. Lucky for me, when my coworker came in to open the restaurant the next morning, they noticed that it had been trashed and ended up finding me in the freezer. I remember waking up in the lobby of the McDonald's being told that paramedics were en route. My lips were still blue by the time they got to me, and I ended up needing to go to the hospital and get staples in my head to close the wound. I'm told that I'm lucky to be alive, considering how long I was unconscious in that freezer. Most people expect McDonald's to be one of their first jobs, and very few people expect it to be their last. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon, and I was working my usual shift. Things were getting pretty busy, so it was all hands on deck. I was working the fry station while also assembling burgers with 2 other crew members, while the other 3 worked on taking orders. Through the chaos, someone accidentally dropped a medium soda in the back, which was no big deal. The biggest issue was that the spill was right in the middle of the little walkway between workstations. So to prevent anyone from getting hurt, I called out and asked someone to grab a wet floor sign and to slow down. I would have done it myself, but I was focused on getting orders together, and after a couple of minutes of standing in one place, I had completely forgotten about the spill. That was when I heard someone call out from the register that the fries are likely done and to check them. So without hesitating, I made my way over to the deep fryer, not paying attention to the spill on the floor. As I was walking, I felt the bottom of my feet get wet, but thankfully, I hadn't slipped or had an accident. I continued to the fries and once again called out about the wet floor sign. Honestly though, I think it was too busy for anyone to hear me. I pulled the fries out of the fryer and began to set up 2 new baskets to get another batch ready to go. At the same moment, my coworker Samantha was coming through the walkway with some food for a drive-through customer, and like me, she had forgotten about the wet floor. Samantha wasn't ready for it, and her feet slipped out from underneath her. In an attempt to catch herself, she stumbled forward and accidentally bumped into me. Without thinking, I placed my hands out toward the counter to catch myself. Only there wasn't a counter in front of me. Instead, there was a deep fryer. Both of my hands plunged into the boiling oil, each one going down to about my wrist before I was pulled out by another coworker who reacted quick enough to save the rest of my arms. I had never felt pain like that. Even outside of the oil, I could feel my skin burning. Cold water only made the pain worse because the nerves had gotten damaged. I was rushed to the hospital, and they managed to repair my hands to an extent through multiple surgeries and skin grafts. However, the nerve damage was too extensive, and I was only able to retain, according to the doctor, about 70% of function in my hands. Samantha felt horrible about what happened, even though I assured her that it wasn't her fault. I should have done something about the wet floor instead of calling out for others to do it. No one could have seen that coming.